The window behind you?
No, I'm not.
No? Okay.
It's
You can begin.
Okay, I want to welcome everybody to our first Zoom planning and zoning meeting. Glad everyone made it and that apparently all of our electronics are functioning. Glad to see everyone at least virtually. So look forward to being able to meet again in our chambers, obviously, as soon as possible. I'd like to start by calling this meeting to order as we have quorum. And our next item obviously is our Pledge of Allegiance that we can do remaining seated so we can see each other. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America
and to
the republic which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
with
liberty
and justice for all.
The next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of our last meeting that occurred on March 3rd, 2020. If there's a motion to approve, I don't know if all board members have been able to.
I'll make a motion to approve them. Raul.
I'll second the motion, Fred.
We have a motion to approve by Raul, seconded by Fred Senra. All those in favor say aye. Anyone?
Aye.
Anyone opposed say no. Hearing no one opposed, item passes. Next item would be the quasi-judicial public hearing. I guess we have to read this into for purposes.
Mr. Chair, none of the items that are going to be presented this evening are quasi-judicial, so it is not necessary.
Okay. So the two items that we're going to be discussing would be, I guess, the A, which has to do with the canopy encroachments. And then B would be the infinity pools. Both of them were recommendations by board member Yanis. And staff has obviously worked on that. I guess at this point, I would ask staff if they want to commence with giving a summary and then we'll discuss it.
Mr. Chair, would you like me to read the ordinance into the record?
Yeah, please.
Okay, the first is an ordinance of the Town Council of the Town of Miami Lakes, Florida, relating to attached canopies for single-family and two-family buildings, amending Chapter 13 Land Development Code, add Chapter 5 allowable encroachments into the required yards and exceptions to the maximum permitted heights at Section 13-1506 canopies, providing for repeal of laws in conflict, providing for severability, and providing for inclusion to the code and for an effective date.
Thank you.
Good evening, board members and chairman. Welcome to our very interesting forum today where we're going to be conducting our normal business as if. This item, as you all know, came about from you guys. This is sourced directly from the planning board out of variances that have happened in the past and concerns of citizens and even variances that haven't happened. As I was discussing with some of you today in your briefings, we have had several applications for variances for items related to this particular situation that have not gone forward because they were always told that the staff would have to recommend against the variance, and therefore the applicants usually chose not to go forward with this and make the expense and the bother of putting together a variance application. The situation is that there's the code allows for accessory structures or accessory buildings to be in rear yards of single family homes. The code provides for these accessory buildings to be 5 feet from every property line and to occupy up to 20% of the rear yard. These accessory structures or accessory buildings must be, though, located at least 10 feet from the main structure, from the residence. This is for fire code reasons. This is for other building related issues that we're not going to get into. But those 10 feet preclude those accessory structures from being feasible in smaller yards. And because our requirement for a rear yard is only 25 feet on most properties and even 20 feet in other properties, most of the regularly plotted lots in Miami Lakes end up being yards that are 20 to 25 feet deep. These, the fact that they're allowed to have such structures in such a small yard makes applicants and residents hope to create these structures, and when they come in to get them approved, they realize that they can have basically a very long, skinny building running around along the rear property line. They end up with, in order to be able to use up their 350 square feet, they end up with a 10 by 35 building, which is basically a very long colonnade, and it has to be located 5 feet from their rear neighbor property line. So basically you're encumbering the rear property line with this large structure that takes up most of the rear property line. So more than half of the rear property line. It is not a good condition. It is not a good situation. And in looking for solutions for this problem, staff considered two possible options. First option was to reduce that required distance between the main property and the accessory structure, so say less than 10 feet, so that these structures could be a little closer to the main property line. And the other consideration was to just allow these structures to be completely attached, so reduce that to 0 and completely attach the structure to the main structure. As you can see in the staff report, there's some calculations that went into it to see what the numbers offered. And staff has realized that the best option really is to extend the allowable encroachment of canopies, which are attached structures to the main structure, right? So this is like the same as attaching the gazebo to the main structure and allowing that to encroach into the rear yard up to half of the distance of the rear yard. The result of this is that these, now you're allowing for the same applications that any gazebo would pretty much serve, which is allowing for the summer kitchens and allowing for some dining areas and some nice outdoor spaces to be used. But it removes this from being so close to the property line that is encumbering on the rear neighbor, and it makes it closer to the main property, which has some advantages as far as structural controls, and it also brings the water and electricity closer to the main structure, so it's better from the building perspective as well. And that is what you have in front of you. It is basically the ordinance allowing these canopy structures to be encroaching a little farther than they are today. And yes, if residents were to opt for these longer than 7 feet canopies, they would have to forego the detached gazebo structure. So they would only get this or that, not both. And this would all be contained within the same square footage that would be allowed under the detached structure ordinance. And I'm ready for questions.
I'll open it up for questions from staff. I mean, from our fellow board members. I have a couple of my own, but I'd like to hear everyone first. If there's any questions.
If anybody has any questions, you can raise your hand.
Vice Chairwoman Lynn Matos, do you have a question?
I really have a comment, Susanna. We talked a little bit about this today. One of the things I like about this is that it keeps that structure from being right on top of your adjacent neighbor. Am I correct? Because now we've extended that away from that 5 feet minimum.
Correct, and that's definitely one of the advantages of this particular solution to the problem. Because if we were to just reduce the distance between the allowable structure and the main home, this would not enlarge the distance between the neighbor and the structure. So you would still have this rather large structure very close to the property lines on the rear yard.
So in essence, the neighbor could have the same structure and you'd almost have them back to back, right? So I'm cooking on a summer night and everything I'm cooking is going to my neighbor's yard, in essence. This gives a little bit more space.
For both yards.
Right, for both. Okay.
And most likely in the configuration that we have, if your lot is 25 feet rear setback, most likely your rear yard neighbor also is another 25-foot rear setback. So you have two 25-foot rear setbacks back to back. If you put two structures at the 5-foot setback, these structures are really 10 feet apart.
Right, that's what I'm,
In this new configuration, now we have 25 feet between the structures and 25 feet between the summer kitchens or the outdoor seating areas or the outdoor dining area.
right. As long as my hand is raised, just very quickly, can you touch a little bit on the fire component that we talked about earlier today?
So I don't really want to, talk too much about fire situation because I'm not very familiar as to why the 10 feet came into play to begin with. I know that it had something to do with fire separation. I know that it had to do a little bit with maybe having a barbecue in one of the areas and maybe the structure catching on fire and it being easier or more difficult for it to catch into the main residence. But that's not something that I'm extremely familiar with, so I don't really want to get too much into it. In zero lot line properties, the distance between the accessory structure and the main structure is 6 feet. So it has been reduced for smaller properties. At the same time, there's always a reticence to reduce that even further because at some point it just becomes ridiculous. I mean, if you have less than 6 feet, less than 4 feet between the two structures, it's really almost like they're attached. So they might as well be attached. And then you reap the benefits of having the structure be one and then the structural benefits and having the piping be all together, being the electricity all together. It just simplifies things quite a bit.
Okay, thank you.
Board Member Senra, you had a comment or a question?
No, I don't. I think that the recommendation that the staff is given in this matter looks good to me. Very acceptable.
I believe Board Member De La Sierra is the one that would like.
De La Sierra. You need to unmute. Board Member De La Sierra, you have a question or a comment?
Yes, I do. On page 16, it has an attachment and it shows figure 1 and figure 2. And I just wanted to know that figure 1 is the way it is originally proposed, 5 feet from the back, and figure 2 would be the new way that it would be allowed?
Correct.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know, that that was the case.
And if you can see on figure 1, the length of the structure that is allowed, because it allows 350 square feet, but it can only be 10 feet deep. It creates a structure that is 10 by 35, which is a very odd proportion, and it really turns into some sort of bizarre colonnade right at the property line. It is really not something that is conducive to good architecture to begin with. So it's something that we really need to work on improving.
So if you have if the unit that you're putting in is separate from the house, then you could be more than 5 feet away from the property line with a separate unit like that.
Say that again?
In figure 1, it has it separated from the house and it's 5 feet from the rear property line. But in effect, with the new ruling, you could bring it closer to the house, but not touching, and have a smaller unit in a square, or no?
No, sir. With the new ruling, you would completely attach it to the home.
Only attach it to the home.
Completely attached to the home. You can make it a little deeper. So instead of 10 feet, you can make it 12 and a half if your yard is a little larger, which is a better proportion because you would get a little more of a square structure, not so long, skinny. But no, you could not have both a detached structure and an attached canopy. You would have either one.
My question would be is if you have it detached, what would you be able to have then? If you have a detached,
you can have what you can see in figure 1. It's 10 feet away from the house, 5 feet away from the property, which only really leaves you 10 feet for the structure.
So that's all you would be allowed?
Correct.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
And that is what is allowed as of today. That's what is allowed in the current code.
And it would continue that way?
Right, if we don't pass this ordinance, and they would still be allowed to have this if this is what they choose. They just couldn't have both a larger than 7-foot canopy and a detached structure.
Okay.
Right.
Yep, I got it. I understand. Thank you.
No problem.
All right. Board Member Senra, your hand is raised again. You have another comment or question?
Well, I just want to make sure that we're clear. So either one of the figures on the attachment A will be approved under this ordinance, depending on what the need of the person is, right?
Correct. They could still choose, yes.
So yeah, that's fine. I think it makes a lot of sense the way that you presented it.
I have a couple of questions. So obviously we're still, the whole green space requirement in the back and all those things are still applicable, correct? I mean, there's nothing.
Correct, yes, we're not changing any of those numbers. The 350 square feet that they're allowed to cover as of today, it is still at the 20% of their rear yard requirement. So those numbers are still being maintained.
Okay, now in terms of the actual wording in the ordinance, on page 21, we basically define awning as meaning a detachable roof-like cover and canopy, a similar definition. But within the same, which this goes on to page 22, when the subsection that talks about construction, it then goes into if a canopy has a pitch equal to or greater than 2 1/2 shall be constructed of standing metal seam roof, barrel tile, flat tile, and other materials. Is that, because when I read that, because one of my comments I had was, I know that a lot of what people are doing nowadays or would like to do nowadays instead of the canopy is that pergola kind of thing. Is that contemplated as an allowable use?
Well, that was not part of the intent of the ordinance to begin with. Yes, you are correct that we get a lot of requests for that kind of rear canopy, but that was not the intent of the original request by the board, so I did not include that as part of the ordinance. If that's something that the board would like to add to it right now, the way that is structured is the same exact way that all canopies are structured in the existing ordinance.
But, okay, so I mean, that's something that I guess we could bring up as a board to decide whether we want to expand beyond canopies to pergolas or however. But in terms of constructing the actual ordinance, though, I don't know if what I'm, and maybe, Lorenzo, you could chime in here. My concern is we're basically saying, in the top, we're defining what the word canopy is, and then we're basically saying in the construction that if a canopy has a pitch of this, then it has to be a metal roof. So it almost seems like we would allow a metal roof, barrel tile. I mean, that's what I'm reading, and I could be misinterpreting it.
No, I don't think you are at all misinterpreting it. It's pretty clear. Barrel tile, flat tile, or another material which simulates barrel tile. And that's currently what we're allowing for roof construction. So it mimics that.
So how does this differ from if I want to just go pull a terrace?
Do you want to do what?
Like if I go now and I want to do a terrace on my property, what I would call a terrace, which would be kind of something.
A deck, you mean? Like a deck.
Right.
Covered porch.
I don't believe.
Still do the 50% or no, or how does that?
Right.
Yes, I don't believe that this doesn't affect as far as the coverage areas that are required. Correct, Susanna?
So these are encroachments onto the required rear yard. So these are beyond anything that is the rear setback of your property. Okay. So if you were to do a terrace that is not encroaching, it has nothing to do with that. These are only things that are already encroaching onto the rear yard. All right, so what we mean by that, there's a limit of how much you can pave on the rear yard. There's also a limit of how much you can have roofed on the rear yard. This is where the accessory structure comes in.
Right? And that's my concern, because my understanding was I could build a terrace, whatever, call it terrace, canopy, whatever I want, up to 25 feet from the rear in my particular yard. If I wanted to go beyond that, I could only do a canopy or this or that. What I'm saying, though, in terms of the wording, then, I think if in this part of the ordinance, if we're defining that if a canopy has a pitch of this, then you have to do a metal roof.
Okay, so canopy.
Interpretation, then they can put terrace literally beyond.
Correct. So canopy refers to any roof that has legs, that has columns attached to it. Okay. So it could be a canvas roof, it could be a metal roof, it could be a stone, a tile roof. And it's always required to be matching to the main structure. So if you have a main structure that has a metal roof, the accessory structure and the canopy have to match your main structure Or otherwise, if it's a canvas canopy, it could be a canvas canopy. But that's the only two differences. Do you understand? Does that make sense? So, and
I
this
do. I just, you know, I still go back to the way the wording of this. I'm not 100% sure that we want to put if any canopy has a pitch, then you do this, because
that's wording that's already there right now. That is not wording that we're changing at this time.
Right, but that wording was there because you were doing the accessory building. Now you're bringing the accessory building.
That wording was there for existing canopies that were 7 feet encroaching into the rear setback. Because we already had an allowable encroachment for canopies today that was 7 feet. We're increasing that encroachment, and that's the only thing we're doing. And there is a requirement for it to be roofed in a very specific way when it's pitched, because the code is requiring that it not be a fabric owning. I think it's, give me 1 second. Let me read it really fast.
So what would you suggest instead, Ms.?
Well, the thing is, what I'm thinking is, if I go in there with a canopy, with a plan for a canopy that has a pitch equal to or greater than 2 1/2, then I could not do a fabric, whatever the heck. I would have to do a barrel tile roof.
Correct. If that's what your main home is, that's what you need to do. Correct.
Right.
But we don't allow, so we're going to allow an encroachment of a barrel tile roof.
Correct. Yes. Is an attached canopy. Yes.
Doesn't that defeat the original purpose of the whole setback and how far back you could go and all those other things?
Well, that's why it's an allowable encroachment. I'm not sure I understand your question.
You just see, my understanding is, again, okay, let's forget about the way that I'm looking at it. Is if I have in my backyard and I have a 25-foot rear setback.
Correct.
That's it. Right. Like in my house actually has 35 feet. So if I wanted to build, I could do 10 feet of a terrace deck, whatever the heck I wanted.
Yes.
To go beyond that, I was under the impression that you could only go beyond 7 feet if it was a canopy material.
No.
Right. That's what I want to make clear now, because
no, today you
could only go 7 feet. But now we're going to allow them to go literally 12.5 feet, and it may or may not be a canopy material.
Right. No, right now you're not restricted to a canopy material. You can do a canopy material or something that matches your existing.
Right. And it was my understanding initially was you could go canopy 7 feet more. But after reading this and getting closer,
it's an awning. So what you're discussing, so the difference between a canopy and an awning is not the material, is how they're used. So an awning goes only over the windows, right? And those are usually the ones that are only canvas. A canopy can be made out of masonry, wood, and tile.
Right.
And it's still a canopy because it's basically a roof with legs. A gazebo is really a detached canopy. And that's what we're discussing right now. It's just it's semantics at the end of the day. But you could have a detached canopy, which would be a gazebo, and that could be made out of tile.
But you know, when we're defining up there, you know, canopies and awnings, you're saying detachable, because the way that I'm thinking is you could actually take out the material. If I do a canopy of barrel tile roof, that's not going to be detachable. I don't think you could build a detachable.
They don't have to be detachable. They can be detached or attached. And we are right now, it could be a detached structure, right? Which would be a gazebo. And that would be a detached canopy would be a gazebo. What is otherwise known as a gazebo, right?
Would a
what we call an accessory building, right?
Okay, so would a pergola now even be then part of this?
So what do you call a pergola? Define.
Basically, it's the ones that are the wood structures that protrude out, and then some people put some kind of a roof covering of actually sometimes they do a translucent, sometimes they do a fabric, and it looks like
is it a roof with columns?
It would have columns at the end, yeah.
If it's a roof with columns that is open on 3 sides, it's allowed. The problem that you have is if the roofing material does not match either the main structure or is a canvas material, it is not allowed. But that's not anything that we're changing today. That is what is in the code as of right now. So a pergola, as you're defining it, what is not allowed in it is the roofing material. As an encroachment is allowed to be if it's not encroaching, because if you're doing it within those 10 feet that you have to spare, then nobody cares, right?
Right. But most people don't have that luxury of having those.
But if you don't have those 10 feet, if you're talking about an encroachment, when you're talking about an encroachment, the code always has a lot more restrictive issues with an encroachment, right? And I don't necessarily know. I would have to do the research to see why pergolas have been excluded from allowable encroachments. I'm sure there's a good reason somewhere that may or may not be fair at this point, but at this particular juncture, as the way that the code is written today, pergolas as an encroachment are not an allowable, because encroachments are required to be either an awning, which means a roof with no legs, so something that is completely attached to the main structure with no columns, right? Or they're allowed to be a roof with columns that is attached to the main structure and that matches the main structure, or is canvas and metal, and that is restricted to 7 feet.
So if you can build a pergola without columns, it
would be an awning.
Yeah, but so that
and only over windows.
Excuse me?
Only over windows or doors, 7 feet.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm thinking is if we're going to allow standing metal seam roof, barrel tile, flat tile, or other material to encroach, then, I mean, at least to me, I would add the pergola. I don't see where the difference is aesthetically speaking, but.
You may wish to put forward the motion to see if the board agrees with you, and I'll be happy to add it for a first reading. One
other question. Does this impact any way the extension onto the side yards? I know that in Miami Lakes we have some.
No.
And currently the canopy is allowed, I think, 5 feet on the side.
No, if it's attached to the main structure, it has to continue to have the same setback, the same side setback as the main structure. You're allowed to have an awning, but not a canopy that encroaches onto the side setback.
So basically on the side, even if you have 20
no columns.
Neighbor, you can't do anything on the side.
No columns, no. As an encroachment. Again, you can have a side awning or a side canopy if you are farther away than 7 feet from your neighbor. Okay. And you have some spare room. But as an encroachment, no.
Okay.
Okay. We have board member Raul de la Sera. His hand was up.
Let me just ask one last question.
Okay.
Are you sure about the either or language? Like if you pick one, you can't do the other? Is that, where would that be? Because it almost seems that I could do, it basically says, where a detached gazebo as an accessory structure is unfeasible as determined by the administrative official.
Provided that no other detached accessory structure is proposed for the property.
So basically this would be, in this case, you or whoever would be the zoning. Okay. Okay.
And again, if they chose to do only the 7 feet as they're allowed as of right now, they could have still the detached structure, only it would be 7 feet for one plus 10 feet plus whatever they would be even left with even less for the accessory structure, because it would have to be at least 10 feet between the roofs. So it would mean even a smaller detached structure.
Before Mr. De La Sierra, Board Member De La Sierra speaks, Chair Julia, are you proposing a motion to make an amendment to this ordinance?
I guess, if Raul and I know Board Member Yanes would like to speak too. So after that, I'll propose
okay.
that or not. I mean, I know Raul probably, maybe you could give us some light in terms of construction wise. Why is it that the pergola construction wasn't an applicable?
Well, pergolas are usually freestanding and they have an open roof. That's a definition for a pergola. It's freestanding with an open roof, like wood trusses across the top, open to the open air. Sometimes people will put plastic over a pergola because they don't want to get wet there, but normally a pergola is open, freestanding, four posts. And I believe my only question was, were you going to allow framing, and if you're going to put the tile on top, you would have to do a regular roof on top of that particular item to be able to do tile, other than doing the aluminum or doing a fabric.
Correct, but remember that's what is allowed right now for a gazebo, for a detached structure. So the only thing that we're doing is basically taking that already allowed detached structure, which would be exactly as you're mentioning with a complete roof, and attaching it to the main structure.
Yeah, that's what I understood would be allowed, that you would be able to do a framed roof across there and then do a regular roofing and put the tile, the barrel tile or flat tile, whatever tile you wanted to put up on top. Standing seam, you could actually do standing seam if it matches your house now.
If it matches your house, correct.
Thank you.
Okay, board member Giannis.
Okay, just a few. Seam roof, barrel tile, flat tile, or other material that was already existing, right?
There was no change
Yes.
to that language. The only thing I added on that language is the standing metal seam, because it was recently added to the rest of the code and it had been left out of this.
Okay,
So I just added that in because it would still have to match the existing residence.
right. I saw that added. And then the other question I had was, why remove the use of other canopy roofing materials under the Florida Building Code can be approved by a variance process? Why did we remove that option?
For the same reason that we removed it out of the metal roofing, the variance process is not the proper way to address changes of material in a canopy. There is no, and you guys have done a few variances with me already, so you understand the concept of the practical difficulty. There is no possible practical difficulty that would be attached to, I just want to have this different material on my canopy. So the variance process is not the correct mechanism to address the desire of a property owner to have a different material on their roofing system. Does that make any sense? So even if we would be happy to allow different materials under a different process, the variance process is just not the correct one. And please, Mr. Correa, please correct me if I'm wrong, but it would be a design review situation or maybe a hearing for design standards, but not a variance.
Right. The variance wouldn't be basically the proper form for them to take up their issue.
Because they could never attach a practical difficulty to that item. For a roofing, even for a roofing of a main structure, I could see a practical difficulty if maybe the existing structure was very light and your existing roofing was maybe shingles, and that therefore the structure underneath of it was not going to be strong enough to hold like regular roofing tiles, and therefore you would have to have a light material to replace your existing shingles, and that could be a practical difficulty. But if it's a brand new structure that you're creating from scratch, what is your practical difficulty to not be able to produce a good building material? There is none. And that's why the variance process would not be appropriate in this case.
Thank you.
So like going back to my pergola thing, if somebody wants to do a pergola, assuming we just keep it as is, who would they appeal that to?
Right now, I really don't know. I mean, right now they would really have no chance to be making a pergola as an encroachment because it's not contemplated in the code. First, it's not defined. Much like canopies and awnings were not defined until, they're not defined as of right now. We're introducing definitions at this point, but there is no pergola definition in the code right now. So if it's not, Ms. Correa can correct me if I'm wrong, and I think he wants to, if it's not directly defined, then it really doesn't exist. And it's the same situation that we're finding ourselves with other items, correct?
Not necessarily. What would happen is if it doesn't exist in our code, then what you would do is you would see if it was or it exists in the Miami-Dade County Code. When we adopted our code, we adopted the Miami-Dade County Code. So anything that we don't change goes back to the county code. So it may be that the county code addresses pergolas and this one doesn't, and ours doesn't. So perhaps it's not a bad idea to contemplate pergolas in making the change now.
But remember that most of this, the spirit of this intervention of changing the code for this was mainly to be able to allow the summer kitchens and the outdoor dining areas into the code, which a pergola is not necessarily a great roofing material for a summer kitchen because you might as well leave it out in the air. So we may be getting a little derailed on the focus on the purpose of the initial, and that may be, so maybe the pergolas are more are better for an additional discussion further down the road where we define pergolas and we allow them as, maybe we find other ways in which they can be allowed and not necessarily just as attached structures or detached. Do you see what I'm saying? Also, because if a pergola is a true pergola, as you're defining it right now, and it truly has an open roof, it really is not detracting from rain getting through. So it's not really covering up the ground. So maybe it doesn't belong in those 350 square feet that are not allowed to be covered up. So, I mean, these are all things that should be considered separately, is what I'm trying to get at.
Okay, that's fair. I believe Board Member Sandra would like to speak.
Yeah, I just want to clarify. Pergolas are allowed in our town, aren't they?
Correct. The part
As a detached structure.
again, and they would be.
No.
Yes, it's not that they're not allowed. Is that if you're talking about them like this is your accessory structure, and this is the accessory structure that is covering up your backyard, and these are your 350 square feet, then it has to match your existing home. And I seem to remember several conversations where people wanted to do open air roofing systems that were told that, you know, if they were encroaching into their rear yard. And this was not necessarily me, this has been previous zoning officials, you know, but I've seen these kinds of conversations before where they were being told, yes, but you need to match your existing home.
But we do have pergolas in our town because I have visited homes that they have the pergola.
that was
unattached to the structure, obviously. But
sure. And remember, Mr. Sandra, that what we're discussing at this point is encroachments into required yards. It's very possible that the homes that you've been to have enormous yards where they really don't have a lot of problem because they have spare space to put additional structures, not just encroaching into their yards. The really tricky situation is when you start getting into homes that are maxed out, where the lot is, you know, to its limits.
Right.
This is where things begin to get a little hairier. So
right, or zero lot type property
right.
or whatever.
Correct. So it's very possible that the homes that you've been to just have
they have huge backyards.
I'm
so, yeah. Thank you.
All right. Does anyone have any more comments or questions? No? Okay, do we have a motion?
Is there a motion to approve?
I will put forth the motion to approve.
And I second the motion.
Okay.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion to approve as worded, as pursuant to staff recommendation, done by Board Member Yanes, seconded by Board Member Sandra. I guess we should just call the roll just in case, but
Okay.
everybody's gonna be in favor.
Board Member Yanes,
Yes.
Board Member Fernandez,
Yes.
Board Member Lesenio, Board Member Leoncio,
Yes.
okay. Board Member De La Sera,
Yes.
Okay, Board Member Senra.
Yes.
Okay, Chairwoman Matos.
Yes.
Okay, Chairman Julia. Chairman Julia.
Yes. Yes.
All right. Okay, the motion passes.
Okay. The next item on the agenda would be that related to the infinity pools in the waterfront properties. I have the ordinance here, so I can just read it into the record. It's an ordinance of the Town Council of the Town of Miami Lakes, Florida, relating to encroachments beyond the tie line for waterfront single-family and two-family buildings, amending Chapter 13 Land Development Code at Article 6 Supplementary Regulations at Section 13-1605 Waterfront Properties, providing for repeal of laws in conflict, providing for severability, providing for inclusion into the code, and providing for an effective date. Staff would like to make their presentation, and then we'll open it up to the board. Thank you.
This item, just very much like the one before, came out of another planning board, a new business item by Ms. Yanis. The reasoning for this one was that even before this board, we have had two variance items where one of them was an infinity pool to begin with, and the second, which was a regular pool that was requested that it be turned into an infinity pool because it was also encroaching into the tie line beyond the tie slope. And the board realized very wisely that the code currently does not address infinity pools and the needs of infinity pools as a construction method. The intention of this ordinance today is to allow the infinity pools to exist in waterfront properties, which is where they belong. The town of Miami Lakes is in a flat surface, and therefore we don't have mountains, cliffs, and other places where infinity pools would be very, very, very appropriate. However, we do have many waterfront properties, which is where infinity pools are at their best, because the eye effect, the visual effect of the water melting into each other works best when there's, when there's a lake right beyond the infinity pool. The way that the staff has addressed the issue of infinity pools is just to allow only the catch basin to be encroaching into the tie line. Obviously, if the property owner needs any other parts of the pool to be encroaching onto the area beyond the tie line, waterward of the top of slope, they would have to come in for the variance anyway, like other people have done. But allowing the catch basin to encroach into the tie line is really the structure of the catch basin is a very similar structure that all the things that are already allowed to exist beyond the tie line, much like decks or steps or walkways. It's basically a thin concrete structure that catches water and returns it back to the main pool. So there's really very little reason why it's not already an allowable encroachment. And as long as we keep it within the same square footage allotments that already exist for such structures, they have 225 square feet worth of paving that they can do beyond the tie line. As long as we keep it within those numbers and we don't increase the percentage of paving they can do, there is no reason why this catch basins are not an allowable encroachment. And that's the ordinance that you have before you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from our board members?
Any comments or questions? Yes, Board Member Raul de la Sera.
Correct.
The question I have is, if a homeowner wants to go ahead also, besides the encroachment of the waterfall effect, additional space into past the tie line in their property like we had on a previous property just recently, would they still be able to come before the board for that?
Sorry.
Yes.
I couldn't unmute myself for a second.
That's okay.
They can always come in before the board to request additional encroachments. This is always a prerogative that any property owner has, whether we agree with them or not. This is their right as a citizen, is to request of their government to have an exception to the rules. What this allows them is not to have to come in for the sole purpose of the catch basin. So if they can configure their pool to just be the upper level edge to be at the tie line, then the catch basin can be just the only encroachment. This allows them to do it as of right without having to see the board. If they need additional room for that, then they can always come in, yes.
Okay, thank you. That was it. Thanks.
Okay, does anyone have any more comments or questions?
No, I mean, I'm just glad to see that our code, I guess, allows for boat ramps and docks and all these other things. So I didn't know that. Whatever. I guess this is still current code. I mean, all those things. Right?
Yes, correct.
Interesting. Any?
I'd like to make a motion to approve.
Okay, we have a motion to approve by Board Member De La Sierra. If there's a second.
Second.
Second by Board Member Fernandez. I guess I do the roll call just in case.
Okay. Board Member Senra?
Yes.
Board Member De La Sierra?
Yes.
Board Member Leoncio? Board Member Leoncio?
Yes.
Board Member Yanis?
Yes.
Board Member Fernandez?
Yes.
Okay. Vice Chairwoman Matos?
Yes.
Chairman Julia?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay. I don't know if there's any. The next would be the director's report.
Yes, the director's report.
Right.
In the manner of the director's report, I have to say that the next council hearing is going to be very much all about planning and zoning, and a lot of your items are coming in before them. They're going to be hearing these two items: the landscape item and the artificial turf item, and they're going to be hearing again the mobility fee item and the second reading for the 30-foot driveways. There's another item that was also come in as a business item last time, which was the cul-de-sac driveways. That one we're waiting for the 30-foot driveways for the zero lot lines to get approved or issued or codified, so that we can then amend that one to include the cul-de-sac driveways in a reasonable way, because otherwise we would be amending something that wasn't finished being codified. So when that gets finished, when that process gets finished, we'll bring that one before you too. As far as like I said, it's going to be a great hearing at the council, and I hope you all are watching and seeing the results of your labors.
What is that date, Susanna?
Say what?
What is the date of that meeting?
I think it's, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Koya, do you remember? It's going to be in April 20th?
It's April 21st.
April 21st.
At 6:30.
Correct. And it will be also a virtual meeting just like this one. This is actually the second virtual meeting that the town of Miami Lakes holds. The first one was a special call that the council conducted last week. This one's our second. Kudos to Mr. Koya, Mr. Cure, that have been finding ways to make these possible, because otherwise we would have to basically sit it out and wait until the quarantine is over to be able to hold our regular legislative session. So this is a fantastic thing that we're even able to do this.
Thank you.
In circumstances.
Very much.
Yes.
Very well done.
Thank you
well
very
done.
much, guys.
Well done.
Good job, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay. The only thing I had to one other thing to say is basically I wasn't obviously at the last meeting, but I did read the minutes, and so I think these two items were brought upon by our board member Yanes, and so I wanted to appreciate you taking the time to actually review code and review what our residents are seeing, and because I think part of our job going forward, as we've seen, we've had probably less and less people come in front of us for variances maybe it's the fee structure, but I don't need to get into that one again. But maybe some of the code does need to be taken a look at, like, like we saw today, the issue of the pergolas. I basically didn't move forward on that because the way I looked at it was more that what we were only dealing with in this thing was in the area of the encroachment. And so that already we need to be careful as to what we allow in the encroachment, because that's already above and beyond the structures. But, I do obviously know of properties that, I would second guess whether that pergola attached, not attached, or whatever the heck it is permitted or not. And I think sometimes we do, I'm going to myself actually start looking more at the code itself, because maybe, and I don't know if maybe in the future we might be able to do something so that we could facilitate the actual code that regulates us. And maybe, so all the board members can actually look at the whole part and start looking at some of the other stuff. Because, a lot of times in my personal experience, I see that people do stuff without permits because either one, it's, it's very difficult to obtain them. They have to go through different things. Sometimes obviously they just do it because whatever other reasons, but sometimes I do see people that, think that, man, I should be able to do this, but, I can't. And it's something somewhat reasonable. And sometimes the cost, prevents them from doing it. So maybe some of those things we could look at and update, basically. So I don't know if that's something that, if the actual, because the whole municipal code is obviously beyond our scope, but if there's just the sections that pertain to the items that we can give guidance on or recommendations on, if those things can be, that section of the code may be done in a copied PDF and sent to all the board members, at least I would appreciate that. I mean, I'm sure I could look at it online and find it myself.
Yeah. That's something that we can work on, Suzanne and I, and we can put that together for you to have, and so you can review. And I think what you said is very on point, Mr. Chair. And as we were discussing, I was looking at the county code, and I was noticing the differences between the county code and our code. And the reason I compared to the county code is that most of our code is derived from the county's language. And then it was put together as things were more, germane to our town. And so those were the items that were tweaked and were added and were modified. So, but that doesn't mean that, they're always current or they're consistent. There's always room for improvement. So I'll try to see if we can work with Suzanne in identifying those and providing those to you.
And as a note of history, when the county code was adopted by the town, it was sort of frozen in time. The county code on its own has continued to evolve separately from us, and ours has continued to evolve on its own. There are things that the county code has contemplated since adoption by us, and that's one of the reasons that we were looking at the landscape code and the last time, and these are the same thing, and we have also evolved on our own. So there's a lot of things where we meet and a lot of things where we diverge. And the reason for that is precisely that they have both been evolving on their own. This is sort of like the Darwinian thing, right? So the one species of monkeys evolved different than the gorillas, and they end up looking like completely two different things, but they started on a common point. Not to get into that kind of conversation, but it is a little bit of the same. In your job as a local planning agency, which is your other job. So the planning board has two jobs. One is the variances, and the other job that you have is the local planning agency, and is, as you have found out, to advise the council as to which parts of the code need to be looked at, so that things don't come up by surprise, shall we say, so that they don't find things, when it's already too late, or where it's already a controversial issue. This is part of your role as the local planning agency. They still may choose to take your advice or not, but it is part of your role to discuss these issues and to bring them up and to have a healthy conversation that they can then rely on to make better legislative decisions.
I have a copy of the original code, because I was one of the original board members at the time, and they gave us a complete copy of the county code when we became the city. I have that. If you want it, Robert, I can give it to you. Okay. So you can see the original one. I still have it.
And I have PDFs of that too. So we have.
You do?
we have those memorialized because there's a sequence of how things change throughout the years. And you know, part of the process that you guys don't see behind the scenes is that everything that we change goes into Municode, and Municode keeps very strict tabs of when what was changed and how. So you can actually retrace the steps to see when and why, and hopefully there's also staff reports attached to every change, and there's reasoning behind all this, and there should be a meeting by, you know, by all these bodies that go through the reasoning of why the changes happen. So, you know, in theory is relatively not simple because it's time consuming, but it is simple to go back and see the reasoning behind all the changes. And that's available to y'all too.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, if no further action, I can call the meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Stay safe,
you.
everybody.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Be safe.
In all, a great group.
Have a good week.
Thank you.
You take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Bye-bye.